Have you ever wondered what an Oscar is worth? Let's talk about the economics of the Academy Awards. It's Oscar season, which has me wondering how much an Oscar is worth. Now we can take this question literally and say, how much is that statue worth? And it's hard to answer because there are only a few of them. We only award about 24 a year. And they're sold rarely, which makes sense. This is the crowning achievement of your career. You probably don't want to sell it off that easily. But every once in a while, they do go on sale. And we've got some big numbers associated with them. In 2012, Citizen Kane's Oscar for Best Screenplay sold for $588,000. In 1999, Michael Jackson, the Michael Jackson, the king of pop, bought Gone with the Wind's Oscar for $1.5 million. Unfortunately, since his death, that Oscar has mysteriously gone missing. But one of the coolest things I've learned in preparing for this video and trying to find out how much that Oscar is worth is that today you can only sell the Oscar for $10. And you have to sell it to the Academy. It's in the contract. When you accept an Oscar, you accept that you will not sell this to anybody but the Academy, and they will only offer you $10. These kind of things, they get me excited. I just think about the contracts involved, what the economics are. If you're interested in more details behind that, just let me know. It's comment below, and I'll see if I can do a video more on the economics of these contracts with the Academy Awards. But let's go beyond just what the statue is. I want to talk about the total value. What is the value of an Oscar, that recognition that you are one of the best movies that came out this last year? This is going to be a tough question to answer, but let me give you a spoiler alert. The answer is in this graph right here. But like a good story, I got to tell you how we get from this point, the question of how much is it worth, to this point, the actual answer. So if we want to answer this question, how much is an Oscar worth, we're going to have to make a few choices. Currently, the Academy Awards give out 24 Oscars, and there's no way for us to evaluate all of those. So I'm going to focus on the flagship, Best Picture. But since only one movie wins every year, we're gonna have to expand this because that would just give us too small of a sample. So I'm gonna look at all movies that have been nominated for Best Picture and see if just the nomination itself has any benefits. But this brings up really the biggest challenge, and that is, how do we even measure what those benefits are? I mean, these benefits are diverse. Studios can attract better talent, directors get more freedom over what they can do, actors might command bigger salaries or freedom on the movies that they want to do. So how do we even measure what all of these benefits are? And unfortunately, the answer is there's just no way to measure them. It's just impossible. So we have to figure out a metric that allows us to measure the value of the Oscar in an objective way. There's one thing that's pretty obvious as an answer. Box office revenues. Box office revenues tell us actually the response in the audience, how much they are willing to go pay to go see this movie that's now been nominated. It's a tangible outcome of the nomination's value. And fortunately, box office revenues are readily available, so we can easily analyze them. One of my favorite websites is thenumbers.com. So let me just freely admit that there is a clear limitation to using box office data, and that is not all movies are in theaters when the nominations are announced. That's just a weakness we're gonna have to accept. Fortunately, most of the movies that are going for this Oscar are released in November and December. That's because they want to stay fresh in the voters' minds, and that presents some other problems that I'm not gonna dive into right now. But of the 72 nominees for Best Picture from 2010 to 2017, 50 of them were actually still in theaters when the nominations were announced. So we're going to use all movies from 2010 to 2017 to figure out what the typical trajectory is for a movie in the box office. So then what we can do is say, this is the trajectory what it would have been if it had not received a nomination. What happens when it does receive the nomination? So here's an example of a typical trajectory for total revenues in a box office. They start off making big gains, but then start leveling off as the weeks go on. Nominees for Best Picture follow a similar trajectory at the beginning, but when the announcement comes out, it's like that rocket gets a second stage and it gets that extra boost and it gets lifted up above, and you see that it goes on to another trajectory and follows that out to the end. In fact, that distance between these two lines, that is the value of an Oscar nomination. But before I tell you what the actual value of the Oscar nomination that I estimate is, let me try to convince you that what I'm doing is actually picking up what I say I'm doing. That is, that I'm actually finding what that revenue boost is as a result of the Oscar nomination. We can describe box office revenues in two parts. First, the number of theaters the movie is in, and second, the amount of money it's making in each theater. The average revenue per theater. So if we analyze these two components, we can get an idea of where this difference is coming from. First, let's look at the number of theaters. A typical trajectory for these movies is to start off high, maybe gain a few in the first few weeks as people realize it's a movie they want to watch, and then drops off as other movies are released and they want to make space for the new competitors. But the trajectory for Oscar movies is very different. They start high and then get an extra boost, an incredible boost in the number of theaters that are actually holding that movie, and then they trail off. So this to me is great evidence that this is actually happening as a result of the Oscar. Now let me show you my favorite one, which is how much money these movies are making per theater. And so if we look at how much revenue it gets per theater each week that it's out, the trajectory is you start high and you fall down until eventually you're not making any money per theater. That makes sense. Again, there are other movies coming out and you want to stay current on those movies. What happens with Oscar nominations though is amazing, and this really shows me that we're picking up a unique thing to the Oscars. Because what you see is the movie revenues start high and they start falling, but then you get a boost in your per theater revenues above and beyond what you would get if you were just in a typical trajectory. But that boost only lasts about as long as the time between the nomination and when the awards come out. There are a lot of ways you can dissect this analysis and tell me that I should make a few changes, but I think it's in the right ballpark. So now that we've laid this groundwork, let me tell you what I have estimated as the value of an Oscar nomination for Best Picture. And in typical Oscar fashion, let me get my envelope. And the value of an Oscar nomination for Best Picture is a little more than $3 million. So the estimate is $3 million. Do you think that's too high or too low? Let me know in the comments below. I'll tell you why I think it's actually a pretty good estimate. There's this article that I found about the Oscar campaigns. When you ever see these ads that say for your consideration, people are paying for that. And what I found is that you're seeing estimates at about $3 million for these campaigns, and some of them range up to $10 million. But what that tells me is this is actually a pretty good estimate. Remember, this is just the gains in the box office revenues, not the gains that come from all the other benefits of having an Oscar. Thanks for watching the video. Remember, everyone loves the Econ Of, and if you do too, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. I'm Craig. Thanks for watching the Econ Of.